Okay, so now the next step is that we got everything taped out the way we want it, and we have our breakaway where we want it. Is I'm just going to take a water-based crackle size and a chip brush, and what we're going to do before we apply our plaster is we're just going to randomly size around the perimeter of our tape line. And what that does is, if we didn't do that and we pulled this tape back out when we're done, what's going to happen is you're going to have these like beautifully cut lines where the plaster fell off, which I've never seen actually happen in a real environment. So we don't want that look. What we want is to apply some size around the perimeter, and the size is going to cause the plaster to fracture. And so what's going to happen is it's going to peel away on its own kind of around this perimeter, and wherever it doesn't peel away, it's going to have cracks and kind of imperfections in it to make it look like the plaster is failing here and leading up to it having fallen off there. It's going to give us a much more authentic effect. So I just take some crackle size on a chip brush, and I'm just going to go around the perimeter. I probably won't go more than 1.5 inches out from my tape line, and in some cases I might go 1/4 inch out. But you just want it to be like a variation, like in and out, in and out. And go ahead and hit all those lines, and then I'm going to let this set up for about an hour. Then we'll get on to putting on our plaster. Okay, so for our ceiling insets, now we need to mix up some plaster. That's going to be the base coat tinted plaster that'll be under our full overlay design, and then we'll overstain and distress and so forth. But what we're going to use is a Modern Masters Venetian plaster, and we've tinted it to OC6, which is a bin more color. We took it to the paint store and they tinted it. All right. And then to that, we're going to add Faux Effects Crackle Mate. This is an additive you add to paint or plaster. The more of it you add, the more it will cause the material to fracture on its own once it dries. And especially where we have the size, it's really going to fracture. So for this, I'm doing a ratio of 3 parts Venetian plaster, 1 part Crackle Mate. And this Crackle Mate, it's just this real weird kind of like gel kind of consistency. And so it kind of clumps together, which is cool. So if I took a drill and a mixer and paddle mixed this stuff together and just made a nice clean mixture, it'd fracture like more consistently and nice. And I don't want that because we're going for like a really organic, old world look. So I'll mix these two together actually with my hands because it's not going to give me a good mix. I'm going to have clumps and stuff as I'm troweling it on, which is going to cause areas of it to just kind of pop and explode and possibly just fall off. It just kind of adds to the effect a little more. And it's kind of like being a kid again. You get to play with your hands and get dirty. So I'll mix this up and then we'll go back up on the scaffolding. I'll show you how we're going to trowel it on. Okay, so see I'm mixing it together, and this is kind of the consistency it's getting. So there's actually these kind of like globs in there, and that's where it's really going to fracture big. And then there's some parts where, you know, it's just Venetian plaster, so it's not going to fracture at all. So just keep mixing this up for a second, and that's kind of the consistency you're looking for. Okay, so now we're ready to start troweling our plaster. And one thing I want to mention to you before you start troweling the plaster, I always take a few photographs of where I've laid in my tape, because a lot of this will be buried in a minute. And just when you're finishing up the project and you're pulling it all back out, you want to make sure you don't miss a piece before you do your final overstain. So I've got my material on my Hawk and trowel, and I'm just going to start troweling over all my areas that are exposed. Okay, and you can trowel right into the tape area or cover it up or do whatever. And I'm just doing kind of like a random trowel, varying the thickness, you know, thicker and thinner. Wherever I trowel it thicker, especially over this size, it's going to fracture a little bigger. And I'm not real worried about like a bunch of movement or anything, because we're going to backfill this with one more coat and just kind of make it pretty flat so our image is a little easier to lay on. And as I'm troweling, if some of this pitting occurs right here, maybe I like the way that looks, I'll leave it alone. It's just going to add more of a distressed look. So we'll just kind of get this surface full coverage minus any little pitting we want to do. Okay, so now I'm back to my walls, and the Photex layer we put on is dry. So now what I'm going to do is just take the same Photex mix again, and I'm just gonna load up my trowel and just kind of drag it across the surface, and what that's creating is the faux text and texture that's already there is kind of grabbing it in random sporadic areas, so it's just creating more texture. So view this last layer of faux text as kind of the coverage layer where we're covering up this first coat and creating like kind of our, you know, random organic look, and now we're adding texture to that faux text layer. So, you know, just kind of dragging the trowel across and letting it create this really random pitted texture. Okay, the second layer of faux text is dry, and you can see all this texture it's added, and some of it, like the fracturing from the grisaille, is actually reading through the material. So when we stain this, it's just going to give us a ton of interest and variance. Okay, and now that the faux text is dry, before we stain it, what we need to do is just take some 100 grit sandpaper, and we're just going to do a light sand over the top. This stuff's really sharp right now, and we don't want to like sand it smooth. We want to keep some of that rough texture there, but we definitely don't want it to feel abrasive to the hand. Plus, it'd be really difficult to stain if we did this. So it's just lightly sanding over the surface to knock down those high points. And then also a rule of thumb is we're actually going to be finishing the trim in this room, so I'm not concerned about this issue. But if you were not going to finish the trim, I would definitely recommend pulling the tape and retaping before you stain. Otherwise, we have enough layers of plaster built up here now where they're built up on that tape. You'd stain, pull your tape, and you'd have this like white line revealing all your different layers, and then you're going to have to go in with a little touch-up brush and take care of that. And it's just a good way to pull your tape and reestablish your line. Just make sure you get really clean lines. Okay, so I let my Venetian plaster with that crackle made dry overnight, and you can see it's just fracturing everywhere. It's falling off in areas. And then along all this blue tape line area we did, you know, it got a lot of fracturing where that size was. So when we go and pull this tape out, it's going to break away all jagged and uneven, and we're going to lose that kind of straight line that the tape on its own would create. But first thing we need to do is just sand this with like a 220 grit sandpaper just to knock down any high points and bust off anything that's going to fall off. Anyway, some of this area is, you know, it's really brittle and it's just going to come right off. And so we'll just give it a light sand, and then we can get on to our next layer of plaster.